Hello, and welcome to the Hypno Travelers on the Magical Psyche Highway podcast. That's right. Your host and tour guide is Scott Prevett, a healer, hypnotist, and a magician. And your bus driver is Jason Gobelli, also a hypnotist, an entrepreneur, and a spiritual guide. Disclaimer, neither Jason, Scott, or any of our guests here today are licensed professional psychologists or psychiatrists. So please don't make any changes to any medication or treatments that you are currently on based on the conversation that you hear here today. Just hop on the bus and enjoy the ride. Trip with us on the Inner Revelation bus. That's right.
Hi, I'm Jason. Welcome back to the Hypno Travelers on the Magical Psyche Highway. We are excited today, aren't we, Scott? That's right.
Heck yeah, we got a great guest for you guys. All the way from New York.
Yes, a great guest. We got the great Peter Blum. Peter, how are you?
I'm excellent. I'm great. I always, when I'm introduced as awesome or great, I'm like, oh God, now I got to live up to that. So I'll do my best to be my best version of myself. All right.
Well, best part of it, you have been living up to it your whole life. So we'll just go with that.
All right.
So
Okay.
Let's get started.
Yes.
Peter, who are you and what do you do?
Which version of myself should I trot out today? I've got so many. Who am I? Well, I am a male in this incarnation, and I incarnated on September 1st, 1947 in New York City. So that means in another month or so, I'll be turning 78. So I've been around for a while in this form. I had many adventures growing up in New York City, and then I moved 2 hours north when I was 22 in the magical year of 1969, which some may know as the year of the Woodstock Festival. I moved from New York City to live in the small town of Woodstock, New York, which is in the Catskill Mountains. And I did whatever I needed to do to survive. I worked a number of different jobs, and one of the most significant jobs was that I worked for 2 years. I managed an occult bookstore in Woodstock. I kind of stumbled into it. I'd had some bookstore experience in New York, and I went in there and I was curious, and wanted to know about certain experiences that I'd had and what would explain them. And this was the time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and I went through all that growing up in New York and in the '60s, and I had seen and heard things that I didn't know where they came from or what they meant. So I immersed myself in books and study and meeting psychics and yogis and clairvoyants and channels and, all tarot card readers and all that kind of oracular stuff. I was very curious, and all the world's great spiritual traditions from the East and the West. And it was all there. And I just was like a kid in a candy store. I was, trying to learn as much as I could about all that stuff. And then I got involved with raising a family, and I had to get a real job because that wasn't enough to support me. So I went, it was fun, but I went to work for a newspaper, and I became a journalist. And I always had a good way with words, and so I was started out as a just as typesetter and paste up, and then next thing I was doing some writing and editing for them, and that I did that for 3 years, from 75 to 78. Had two little kids, and decided in 1978 to pick up everything and move my whole family to live in Europe because I wanted us to have a experience outside of America. So we went and lived in Holland, Amsterdam, Holland, for 3 years. And that was a lot of fun. And I'm a musician, so I was studying North Indian classical music while I was there, which was an interest of mine, and came back and was involved with playing and studying some jazz and other forms of music, and went back to work for the newspaper for a while. until about 84, 85. And I really couldn't, again, it's like the ceiling, they call it the ceiling of growth. Like I reached a ceiling, I couldn't go any farther. I was an editor there at this little one, weekly newspaper, and it wasn't enough to support a family of four. So I didn't know what to do, and I was talking to my friend Richard Zarrow, who had returned from living in California. And he had been studying, and he'd studied NLP with John Grinder, who was one of the founders of NLP, and he had opened a hypnosis practice out there. And I interviewed him for the newspaper, and he was a friend of mine. I said, I would jump. I would tell him to take this job and shove it, but I don't know where to go. That was my dilemma. I was, like in my late 36, 37. I said, I'm still telling people I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, And he said, well, why don't you do what I do? I think you'd be good at it, and I'll train you. Well, I said, that sounds pretty good. And he said, and my practice is so busy that as soon as you're ready, I'll start downloading people to you so you can start seeing clients. I said, this sounds better and better. And he said, and also, I need someone to manage my office. And you're good at organizational stuff, so I'll pay you to manage the office while you're training. I said, done. This is like the proverbial offer you can't refuse, And I always think he was sort of like an angel that was sent into my life to kind of help me out, at that point and take me to the next area of my life. And so I trained in hypnosis, and through him and through a couple other people, I got certified and trained. And that was the beginning of 40 years now of working in this field. And so that's who I am. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a avid tennis player, I'm a musician, and most of the work that I've done to earn a living has been in the field of hypnosis. I love seeing people, working with people, helping them. I was talking to Scott before we went on live, and he was saying something about that he didn't want to listen to people's problems. That doesn't bother me. I have a lot of compassion. I've gone through my own version of hell several times in my life and come out the other side. So if people are struggling with depression or addiction or stuck states, I say, I understand. I've been through my own version of those things, and there is hope. You will survive. You will come out the other side. And if anything, if I can do anything to help you through hypnosis or just being your friend or whatever, that's my pleasure, because we can't do this stuff alone. That's one thing that I've become increasingly convinced of. I work with a psychiatrist, Dr. Louis Mel Madrona. He's been my friend since the late 80s, so 35 years or more. And he is a Native American heritage. He's part Cherokee and part Lakota, but he's a sun dancer and a pipe carrier, but he's also a psychiatrist. So, and he's the best hypnotist I've ever met. Well, I work with him. I started out bringing him to my town. Would you come and teach? And then after a couple of years, he goes, well, the next time I come, we should do this together. And, my insecurity kicked in. I was like, oh, I don't, I'm not worthy, And he said something, he said 3 words that was a game changer. He said, I see you. And I've had that with other elders where they say, I see you. And it's like beyond your surface shell, I see who you really are. And so he was inspiring me, that he saw something in me that I didn't see myself. And that's very empowering. So I work with him, and I bring him and his wife to Woodstock a couple times a year, and we do something we call it, he's got a thing called the Coyote Institute. And I don't know if you know anything about Coyote, but Coyote in a lot of the mythology is a trickster figure. He's very clever, but he also thinks he's more clever than he is. And he's always getting himself in trouble because he thinks he's very smart and he outsmarts himself. So anyway, the Coyote has been a good teacher for me because he you know, Coyote teaches us what not to do. Right? Right. So Lewis, says, according to traditional healing, traditional elders, sickness and imbalance happens in isolation, and healing happens in communities. So whether it's a actual community or a virtual community like you've got here, I'm a big fan of that. I think that's how we heal each other, is by coming together in a community. What one can't do, many can. So we have this thing, like end of August, he and his wife are coming down from Maine, and we'll do 4 days here in Woodstock of what we call Coyote Healing Camp. And it's just people come together and spend 4 days sharing time and telling stories and making masks and doing hypnosis and running around the woods and playing cowboys and Indians, and we just have a blast. And it's very healing for people. It's like camp, but for grown-ups. So that's kind of a version. I mean, I do a lot of work with sound. I alluded to that. That's an important aspect of my life. And I wrote this book back in 2018. Jason, you and I just met. I mean, we might have passed each other in the hallways, but we really just connected out this past week in Las Vegas. And I was out there doing 2 presentations at that conference, Hypnosis Live. And one of them was based on this book that I wrote here, which is Transonics, the vital link between sound healing and hypnosis. So that's part of my mission, is to teach people who are involved with hypnosis the importance of working with sound, and the people who are working with sound healing, which has become increasingly popular, why they should learn hypnosis. So that's that. And then last year I published another book that looks more like a real book. Like that first one, sort of like I just print them up by a handful locally. But this one was published, it's bound, it's published on Amazon. It's called What Is Your BS, which is a slightly provocative title. But then you read the subtitle and it says Exploring Belief Systems Through Hypnosis and NLP. So the BS really stands for belief systems. And that's an important question. Like I might say to Jason, to you, or Scott, like, what are your primary fundamental belief systems? And I ask my clients that a lot. They don't even realize it because they're held unconsciously. But that's how we make choices in the world about what to do and who to hang out with and where to go, is based on our belief systems, who to vote for, all those kinds of things. So, any questions?
Yeah. Peter, what are your primary belief systems?
Okay. So I believe that we come here to have fun and to learn. I think that's why we incarnate. I can't prove it, but that's my belief system. Okay. And I also talk in that book about my values hierarchy, which is related to belief systems. Like what are the important values? What's the hierarchy in my life? And after I thought about it, I narrowed it down to the big 3. And for me, they are have fun, help people, make money. Those are my 3 values criteria. If I'm presented with an opportunity to go somewhere or do something or whatever, my first question is it going to be fun? Right? Because if it's fun, then then I'll have fun. Right? Secondly, will I be helping people? And that's part of my, I'm what's called, or I call myself a Jew-boo. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it means born Jewish, practicing Buddhist. So I'm a Jew-boo. I was born into a Jewish family, but for most of my life, I've been involved with Buddhism, specifically Tibetan Buddhism, although I'm not limited to that. I mean, I'm an ordained spiritual minister. So I'm comfortable with Catholics and Muslims and Hindus. It's fine. All paths. It's that guy, Castaneda. Carlos Castaneda wrote these books, Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge. He went down to Mexico and he studied with this guy, Don Juan. Don Juan told him, all paths lead nowhere. so, so it doesn't matter what path you pick, as long as it's a path.
Nice.
So the path itself, that's what it is, not where it's going. So anyway, as a Jew boo, I believe I embrace the twin doctrines of karma and reincarnation. Those I can't prove them. Those are part of my belief system, right? That I believe that makes sense to me. That we're not just here once, that we come back over and over again, and karma really is just actions and consequences. That's all. Choices and consequences. It's basically, whatever you do is going to lead to consequences, and that's your karma, and you'll deal with it sooner or later. So maybe some of the things, the life lessons that I'm learning in this life or my clients are because of stuff that they did in other lifetimes, or maybe if they're very fortunate in this life, it's because they were a good person in the last life. I don't know. I can't prove it, but it's a useful belief system for me. So those are some of my primary belief systems. I think that the world is here for exploration, right? That it's just out there and it's neither good nor bad, but we can explore it. I mean, I work with clients and they come in and they say, "Oh man, it's a jungle out there. It's every man, woman, and child for themselves." And that they're going around with that hovering, that cloud around their head all the time. I'm like, well, who told you that? Well, usually it was mommy or daddy, right? It was some early influence that laid that trip on them, and they've been going around believing it ever since. So, question, most belief systems are held at an unconscious level. And that's where I think the name of this podcast is Hypno Travelers, right?
Yep.
Right. Plug for podcast. So that's where we as hypnotists come in, is because people often are not aware even of their underlying deeply held belief systems. They're acting on them, but if you ask them what they were, they might have trouble enumerating them or saying them. So I'm trying to help them discover, well, what do you believe in, and if your belief systems serve you, fine, right? If the story, and I often use the metaphor of story. What are the stories you tell yourself? And Lewis, Dr. Lewis Melmadrona, the psychiatrist that I was talking about, that my friend, he said that I believe there are no bad people, just bad stories.
Nice.
So people are telling themselves and telling other people these terrible stories, and they're often disempowering stories, right? And they often start out with the key phrase, "I can't." Right? I can't stop smoking. I can't control my anger. I can't drive over a bridge without feeling dizzy. I can't, and that's a belief system they have, that they've convinced themselves is a story they're telling. And I have my stories, that, I grew up with, and I tell myself, and, every now and then I have to stop and say, is this a good story? Maybe it's time I change the story. Maybe it's not a good story. Maybe it was a good story 20 years ago. It's not a good story anymore. So Dr. Lewis says in Lakota, he said it's hard to talk psychology with Lakota because there's no word in their language for self. You said the closest, that's interesting, right? The closest is the word nagi. Nagi means a swarm. That you're a swarm, you, Jason, are a swarm of stories. All like a swarm of fireflies or something. They're just swarming around and shifting and changing. All the stories that you grew up hearing about yourself and people in your family that you retold, and stories about things that happened to you, and stories. That's all we are. It's a bunch of stories. And oh, of course, yes, there is a soul that's at the core of it. I do believe there is a Atman, that's what the Hindus would call it, that spark of divinity that says, Scott, that's who you are, that's different than me, that's different than Jason or anyone listening to the podcast. But around that is a lot of stories. And that's where we can work as hypnotists to have people come up with better stories. So I use stories a lot in my work. I tell people stories before they go into trance. I tell them stories while they're in trance. I tell them stories after they come out of trance. And sometimes they'll say, well, what did that story mean? And I'll say, oh, that's just a story.
It's all Ericksonian on them.
You caught me. Yes, my biggest influence amongst the people I never met. And I was really annoyed at Milton Erickson for dying before I could meet him. But that's what he did. He went and died in 1979. I didn't hear about him until 5 years later. So what can you do? I did the next best thing. I read books that he wrote and books that were written about him. And I found people, it's like the 12 apostles, the people who studied with Erickson. I found a couple of those people and studied with them and tried to get the down low from them. Well, there's a famous, story, because he was such a charismatic and hard to figure out person. And he was brilliant. And they say, how many Ericksonians does it take to screw in a light bulb? Well, 20. One to do it, and the other 19 to talk about how Milton Erickson would have done it better. So, yeah, right. He was brilliant, but again, there's only one Milton Erickson, and I used to call what I was doing Ericksonian hypnosis, because it was closer to that than Elman or other styles of direct hypnosis. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? If anything, it's Blumian. It's like but I wouldn't say that because that sounds ridiculous. But we all make our own stew after a while, right? I have stuff that Erickson didn't. He had a lot of stuff I didn't have, but I have things that he didn't have, like growing up in New York City, and all other adventures.
Speaking of stories and growing up, Peter, when did you have that aha moment? Like, wow, I'm going to be able to help people.
Well, as I said, I think it was when I was brought into the field of hypnosis. It wasn't just a source of income. It was also like, I love doing this. I mean, I as a Buddhist, I took something called the Bodhisattva vow. And that it's like where you take this vow that I'm not going to seek personal liberation. I'm not going to, they talk about the wheel of birth and death and rebirth. And some people do seek to liberate themselves. I don't want to incarnate again. I want to get through this and not have to come back here as a human being. But if you take the Bodhisattva vow, you say, I'm not seeking personal liberation. I'm sticking around because I've taken this vow to help liberate all sentient beings from suffering. So I took this vow, and then some years later, I was like, holy cow, what was I thinking? Man, I should have read the fine print. I'm going to be here for a really long time. There's so many. But again, what would I rather be doing? I don't know. I think this is as good as anything, right? Because if we're all connected, which I really do believe we are, and when I spend time with my native friends and we do sweat lodge, there's a phrase in Lakota called that says "Ho Mitakuyasin." I don't know if you ever heard that phrase. Mitakuyasin means in Lakota, we are all related, or all my relations. So, like Scott, you and I may have never met before today, and the first thing I might say is Mitakuyasin. We've never met, but I'm claiming relationship with you, right? We are related. So, in that sense, we are, like that old song from the 60s, we are family, right? We are. We're all one big family of humanity. And so that to me makes sense, maybe not to anybody else, but that aha, like I can do this, I can actually help people, maybe. Although I sometimes ask this question, well, who is the healer? Who is the healer? It's uh, Dr. Lewis has a wonderful quote that I have almost memorized, where he says, I've been doing this work. I've been on this red road for about 40 years and studying healing and with medicine people, but I'm reluctant to call myself a shaman. I'm that it's uh he said one shaman that I held in high respect, and a shaman, for those who don't know, is a medicine person, a healer in indigenous people. And he said one very powerful shaman I know said I'm about as powerful as a dead chicken. And he said, well, why do you say that? He said, well, listen, creator does 70% of the healing and the patient does 20%, and I do 10%, which is barely worth mentioning. So, that's a properly humble way to approach it. And so, well, if that's the case, why are we taking money?
That's interesting. Now,
Right?
listen. So
Great point.
now you said we're all family and we're all
Yeah.
related, but
Yeah.
how do your kids and the rest of the family fit into your hypnosis business? Does it take time there,
Oh,
or what's
no.
going on? Are they
How
involved?
did they fit in? Um, Pretty good. I mean, I was making more money doing hypnosis than I was as a newspaper reporter. So my wife liked that part of it, And my kids, my son was going through, when he was about 11, 12, he was going through a crisis of confidence, and he felt he was skinny, and my hypnosis mentor came over and offered him some free sessions. And the guy I was studying with had used hypnosis to win the New Jersey amateur Mr. New Jersey bodybuilding contest when he was younger, and he got a wrestling scholarship to college through hypnosis. So he went and did some stuff with my son, and he got him a bench, a weight bench, and he had him lifting weights, and now he's in it. My son's in his 40s and he's buffed out. He's a gym rat. And so he did something there that helped him out. My daughter was curious, but never really, was too interested. And then when she was a teenager, she said, Dad, I'm nervous. I have to take my driving test. Can you use some NLP with me and help me? And I said, okay. But I have to tell you, it took me 3 times to pass my driving test. I'm just being honest with you. Most people don't pass their first time. So I'll do something with you. And sure enough, she didn't pass the first time, but she passed the second time. So, I mean, a lot of times you're not really ready yet when you take the test. And so, but they weren't too curious about it for a long, long time. And then stuff happened in my life that I don't need to go into the details now, but I went through my own dark night of the soul, and got thrown out. My ex-wife threw me out at one point, and I had to kind of recreate my life, and suffered some alienation temporarily with my kids, but then everything got mended, and I learned about my the harm that I had created. And I tried to clean it up as much as possible and make amends, and took a while, but my ex-wife died and we were friends again, and my kids now are 48 and 51. So my daughter has kids of her own, and she was teaching school. She went and got her master's in teaching ESL, English as a second language, and she was doing that, and then she had these two lovely young children, and a couple of years ago, a few years ago, she said the boys are now in preschool and school, and I want to go back to the labor force. I want to go back to work, but I don't want to be a teacher again. And she said, I was thinking, Dad, maybe I could do what you do and you could train me. I was like, oh, be still my heart. This is like, I can't believe that you're asking. I'd love to do that. So she came up, she's living in North Carolina and I'm in New York. And she said, Steve, her husband, has agreed to watch the kids. And she came up, for 4 days. And then a couple months later, another 4 days, completed the 8-day certification training, and is now, trained to practice hypnosis. So somehow or other, she must believe that what I'm doing is not completely, nonsense. Although, my partner, who's a wonderful healer, I've been with this woman now for 30 years, and she's a reflexologist. She works healing people through the feet. And we have a little inside joke where we say, they haven't caught on that we're frauds yet. They haven't caught on that we're, but of course, it's like you see behind the curtain and, but I think I have helped a lot of people. And so one of the things that I heard in the rooms of 12-step, where I spent some time getting my life straightened out, is we will love you until you learn to love yourself. And I think with a lot of my clients, it's like, I'll believe in you until you learn to believe in yourself. I'm going to see you as the person you could be. Just like Lewis said to me, I see you. I can say that to my clients. I can say, you may not believe that you can do this. I do. And I'm going to hold that belief until you step into it. So that's something we can do for people. We can't change them, because actually, I think that the truth is the only person I can ever change is myself. I can influence people. I can make suggestions to them. Primarily, what I can do is hold a healing space for them while they go through that process of finding a better way. And that's kind of like the frame that I hold for myself. I have all these skills and tools and Ericksonian language patterns and working with sound and storytelling, but it's really just to sort of hold that space and make it possible that they can discover, the best, there's the Tao Te Ching, which is a classic work of Taoism, right? The way of life by Lao Tzu. And there's a thing about a leader is best when people barely know that he exists, when they say, we did this ourselves, right? And I think it's the same about a therapist or a hypnotherapist. Somebody walks out of the office and says, that was great, but I really kind of figured that out on my own. I'm saying that, right? Exactly. Just pay me.
So speaking of that,
yeah.
How do our viewers get a hold of you? You got so much going on. How
do they get a hold of me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm easy to find. I got an Instagram page and two Facebook pages, one under my name, one under Sounds for Healing. And I have a website, Transonics, just like that title of my book, one word, TRANCESONICS.com. And come to Woodstock, come visit me, come for Coyote Healing Camp. Come at the end of October, we have a 3-day storytelling festival. Come to the jungle of Mexico in March for a week. I think we changed it February. I just had a business meeting today, and my collaborator who owns this retreat center said, we got to change the date to February because the airline prices are half as much. I'm like, okay. So, but anyway, I'm going to do a week of shamanic sound healing in the jungle in Tulum, Mexico. So I got a lot of stuff going on, but if you want to work with me or talk to me, call me up or email me or, find me through my website. There's a way you can say you're interested and then I'll contact you, and it's easy, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now, if you do coyote healing, who's the road runner?
Beep, beep, beep. That's a good question. Whoever wants to be, but we do order all of our supplies from Acme Supply Company.
That's funny.
Right.
Hey, Scott, do you have anything you want to add?
Heck yeah. Peter, you were just out at Hypnothoughts in Las Vegas at the big Hypnothought conference. What did you speak about out there?
Okay, so I gave 2 presentations. I gave a 2-hour presentation on transonics, which is, the link between sound healing and hypnosis. And that was pretty well attended. And the one that was really well attended was called Lessons of Shamanism, the World's First Hypnotist. Because a lot of people in the field of hypnosis, they think, like that shaman, you're going to go off to Mexico, Peru, and drink some psychedelic medicine. That's a lot of what people nowadays, but a shaman was much more than that. And some of them didn't use psychoactive materials at all. They used story and ceremony and song and dance and ways to get people into a dreamlike state that you don't always need a substance. There are many, many different ways to do that. And they knew about this. And so I said, it behooves you as a hypnotherapist to go and study the history of how shamans work, because they understood trance really well. They were masters of the trance state. So those are, I present on all sorts of stuff. Last year at Hypnothoughts was my first year there. And so I did a 1-hour presentation called What? And the second one has an exclamation point and question mark, like what? And the subtitle was Confusion, Ambiguity, and Vagueness, which I had so much fun doing this. And, and at the end of it, this woman came up to me and she said, I didn't really understand what you were talking about. I said, exactly.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Nice.
But a lot of this is like based on Erickson, that people who don't know about Erickson, he didn't do a lot of like directive hypnosis. He often used stories, and they say of all his all his induction techniques, the one he probably used more than anything was the confusion technique. And people say, well, why would that, they have an idea, that it's negative to be confused. I say, well, actually, when you're confused, you often retreat inward to try to find a search for meaning. And that is the beginning of a trance, can be, right? You're going inside, and Erickson would do these things and tell people stuff and do things in a very confusing way until they were desperate. And then he'd say one clear thing and they'd be like, oh, thank God, and grab onto that. So that's a way of kind of getting people frustrated by not making sense, and I when I gave that talk, I wore my favorite T-shirt, one of my favorite T-shirts my son got me. It's based on that Talking Heads film, and it says in big letters, "Stop making sense."
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. So, it's been a pleasure talking to you, gentlemen, and you'll, I'll see you all around at certain other gatherings of the great and near great. And to everybody else who's got this podcast, as the famous saying, good night and good luck.
Now, Scott, anything else?
I can't think of anything.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out and spending time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we almost used up an hour. How about that?
Yeah, Peter, I got one more question for you, though. We're not through yet. The big
Okay.
one.
All right. Well, you're like Columbo. Just one more thing.
Exactly,
One more
exactly.
thing.
I got Italian blood in me, so I got to give it. Okay.
All right.
What are your words of wisdom that you want to leave our viewers with?
Always assume the kindest possible thought until proven otherwise.
Awesome.
Nice. Beautiful.
That is
Beautiful.
awesome.
All right. All right.
Thank you for those words of wisdoms. Thank you for being here. We certainly appreciate traveling down your magical psyche highway.
All
And for
right.
our viewers out there, we're glad you're here too. We're glad you're traveling. We hope to see you next week. Please subscribe, follow us. If you like us, give us a thumbs up. If you think we're assholes, we don't care. Just give us a thumbs down. We're just glad you're here. We're glad you're showing up, and we really hope to see you next week. Thanks for coming.
Wow, what a trip. Thanks for taking that journey with us today. Please like us, share us, and enlighten us with your views of the topics we drove into today. We appreciate you and love reading your comments. Thanks again, and we hope to see you back on the bus next week. That's right.